Thank you very much, Rolf, and good morning, everybody. Glad to see so many people here after what was a very good evening last night at Milk Boys. Anybody who didn't get there, you missed something. So I totally endorse what Rolf has said. We've learned an enormous amount over the last 2 days. And we've seen applications of big data. We've seen how mobile and big data integrate. We've seen digital qualitative applications. We've delved into neuroscience, a whole series of things. But where does the fuel for all this innovation come from? And how much, to use Rolf's words, are we becoming a sexy destination for funding for venture capitalists? So Cambiar runs an index, a measurement, an annual measurement called the Cambiar Capital Funding Index. And all this is really is that we log and analyze every single announced investment that comes into the marketing, research, analytics, and information industry. Notice that's quite a broad umbrella, deliberately. So what this is about is all the capital infusions that come in by a certain point in the year, new capital infusions. It has to be absolutely brand new capital coming into the industry. So there may be other deals that are unannounced, but probably those don't amount to huge amount more. And we take all of this from news feeds, from websites, from anywhere that these sorts of deals are announced, and then we analyze them. So what I'm going to do today is to just take a look at the quantum of investment coming into the industry, where it's coming from, and most importantly, where it's going to. So that you'll learn by the end of this the buzzwords when you want to put your request out there for funding to have in your information memorandum. So let's just look back a couple of years to 2011. In 2011, there was $1.1 billion infused into this industry. About $830 million of that came from private equity and venture capital, and the remainder was the flotation of new shares on the Paris bourse that Ipsos did to buy Sinovate. So kind of an outlier there. And 90% of the enterprises that were funded were in the States. And that's something I want to come back to, why that should be. At that time, in 2011, about 50% of the funds were coming into what was being called analytics. Basically, if you had the words analytics and social media in your information memorandum, your book, you were going to get the money. So that was where it was in 2011. What changed in 2012? So 2011, $830 million from the venture community and the private equity community. Anyone want to take a guess for 2012? Double? $1.7 billion. 141% increase. Absolutely staggering increase in the sheer amount of money coming into the industry. Analysts, investors have woken up to the fact that this is actually a hot industry. Even though, that's a small portion of the 26, 27 billion that venture capital put into, all investments in 2012, it's still a significant proportion. So we are of significant interest today, and I'm constantly now seeing VC and private equity guys at conferences like this, almost kind of trolling to see where their next investment is going to be. Where did it go? Well, in 2012, it's all about analytics. 72% of funding came into things that had an analytics orientation. Only 16% of those funds went to something that had a market research orientation. And of that, classic survey research received zero. Absolutely zero. So this is all outside of survey research. Where was the investment? Well, there's the three big buckets for you. Big data, which is a quarter of it. Social media monitoring, listening, analytics, and mobile. And mobile is significant here because it's been growing for the last few years, but we've all been waiting for the point at which the inflection point for mobile. Well, in 2012, certainly from an investment point of view, it arrived. There are a few other things that are of interest here. There's still investment in sample and data collection in terms of how do you find people, a little bit anyway. There's investment in crowdsourcing, not that much in DIY platforms, and funnily enough, not that much in biometrics or neurosciences. And this is something we've seen when we triangulate these data with what clients are saying that they're really interested in or really integrating and what people are saying they're offering. Neurosciences is still lagging behind. And in that, I tend to break out facial coding and eye tracking on one side. Those are of interest. But the sort of stuff we've been hearing about EEG, fMRI, that hasn't yet caught on. Not to say that investors are necessarily, the be and end all of this. They are, after all, still herd animals. But if you triangulate those three sources of information, where the investment's going, what people are supplying, where the demand is, it gives you a pretty good indication of the future. Just to give you this is two sets of data on either side, but over $1 billion went into analytics. That was up from just under 300 million last year. So threefold increase in the monies going into analytics. Analytics and big data are the words for analysts and investors these days. Big data came from nowhere in 2011 to $350 million worth of investment last year. Interestingly, then the rest of social media, 300, mobile, 177 million, and crowdsourcing also beginning to appear interesting to investors as well. Now, if you triangulate that with what clients are saying, this is from the Cambiar Future of Research survey in 2012. We asked them, what have you integrated into what you're doing in research and insights, what you're trying out, and what you're planning to try out. And you can see that things like web analytics and DIY research and proprietary panels, they have pretty much, they're getting to mainstream acceptance. What is really interesting is down the bottom, you've got things like mobile and emotion measurement, which are things that are juicing clients now in terms of what are we going to try, what are we going to go into next. And I think that's why you're seeing also investors starting to get excited and going into, certainly where mobile is concerned, going into that area. Now, I said we'd come back to the fact that in 2011, 90% of funding was in the States. In 2012, it was still about 80%. And with Europe only taking 11% and Asia 8%. And we've been trying to work out why this should be. Why are we an inherently more capitalistic country? Or is there absolutely no investment going on in Europe? Well, any of you who've been listening to papers here the last 2 days will know that there's plenty of really innovative European companies that have been talking. And if you go over to the European markets, in the UK, Holland, Belgium, Germany, there are reams of very, very innovative companies, very successful innovative companies in this space. So why aren't we seeing this in this data? And the answer really is that on this side of the Atlantic, we are much more technology-oriented in our innovation. We rely on technology to propel us forward. Whereas in Europe in particular, and to a certain extent in Asia, it's much more about IP and innovating in IP, not necessarily in technology. What will be interesting over the next few years is to see whether these two trends actually intermingle or not. Some of you may be familiar with the funding stages of seed funding and early funding, Series A, Series B, Series D, Series D, the sequential ways of funding a company. Basically, this is a classic bell curve in terms of where people are investing in our industry. A lot of investment at the Series A stage, about 300 million. Series B stage, there's real solid investment there in Series C too. So, investors are sticking with the companies that they're investing in, and they're investing in a number of tranches. Average size of investment, again, by stage. If you're looking for a Series A, if you're looking for seed money, you're going to get about maybe $1 million or $2 million. But if you're looking for a Series A, you might be looking at about $6 million, $5 or $6 million on average. Series B is going to be about $12 million, and so on, it goes up. So, when you're thinking about what you're going to go out and ask for, think about what these investors in these various groupings believe is reasonable. So who's investing? Well, a total of 227 investors in 2012. That's up from 100 in 2011. Between them, they made 130 investments, because a number of these come together, a number of VCs come together to make one investment. There were 177 of them were private equity and venture capital investors. The real biggies, for those of you who are looking for money, these are the guys who show a major interest in our industry. So you've got Crossline Capital, Redpoint Sequoia in particular is very, very active. New England Associates, DFJ is very active as well. IA Ventures is, and Andreessen Horowitz, funnily enough, has really taken a liking to this industry as well. Then there are individual investors, and I think we're undercounting them significantly, but also 15 corporations. Corporations like Google, Intel, Cisco, they've all invested in our industry through their venture funds. And that is about it. This is a sexy industry from the point of view of venture capital. We are really in the limelight like probably never before. So it's a good time, if you're looking for that seed funding or that Series A funding, to think about what you're going to describe yourselves as being. But it ought to be big data, social media, and mobile. There you go. Thank you. Any questions? Big data is a subset of analytics.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the other question is, if you have a private equity firm and they buy a research company for $1 billion, operate it for 3 years, and then sell it for $2 billion, is that $3 billion worth of investment, or $1 billion plus 1 or $2 billion?
It's $1 billion.
It's $2 billion.
Yeah.
Other questions?
I've got one question for you, which is, in terms of, you talked about investment in, what about the exit side? What have you been seeing happening there? What's the exit opportunity typically in this industry? Where are you seeing things changing?
Well, I think we've, what's interesting about that is we haven't seen a huge number of exits yet in this industry. I mean, there are still a number of companies, represented in this room who are still held by private equity, and some probably that are hoping that they'll get out from under private equity fairly soon. But I would say that the wave of exits is not going to really occur until next year, 2015, and that's when we'll be able to start analyzing that. But at the moment, we've had the wave in, we haven't seen the wave out yet.
Any other? I'll give you one more question just for the group. If you look at the dynamics of the industry, what has been, from what you've looked at the data, sort of non-traditional entrants coming with those investments? What's the nature of those businesses? Would you have classified those typically as insights, or are you saying, they look kind of like insights, but they're not?
I think they are, I'd call them primarily technology-driven information and some insights. So there are, when we're talking about analytics companies, a lot of these are analytics platforms, machines that are there to be able to handle big data. The insight side coming out of that, maybe not quite as much, but then there are others who are joining technology and insights. And my colleague Beth Rounds in Cincinnati, another Lenny conference, she ended up her talk by saying to the established research companies, if you don't get on the bandwagon with everything that we've been talking about these last 2 days, you're going to be dead. But she equally said to technology companies, if you don't try and understand our industry and what insight is about, you're going to screw up. And I think a lot of the new entrants we've got coming in here are technology-oriented people who happen to be in the insights industry.
Great. Right.
Okay,
Any
thank
last
you.
questions? No, there we go. Good. Thanks very much, Simon.